It all started on a warm Tuesday morning when I let my retired canine partner, Duca, out into the front yard to relax and enjoy some sunshine while I brewed my second cup of coffee and settled into what was supposed to be a peaceful day off. Duke, a strong, intelligent, and incredibly disciplined German Shepherd, had served 8 years on the police force with me, trained in bomb detection, suspect apprehension, search and rescue, you name it. He did it, and, more importantly, he saved my life on more than one occasion, earning medals, commendations, and the undying respect of everyone in our department. So when he finally retired, I made sure his remaining years would be filled with rest, comfort, and treats, which is exactly why I bought a nice home in a supposedly quiet suburban neighborhood, thinking it would be the perfect place for Duke to rest his bones and for me to finally kick back and enjoy the simpler things in life. But I made one crucial miscalculation. I hadn't accounted for HOA Karen, a nosy, entitled, self-proclaimed enforcer of every HOA rule who clearly believed that her laminated president of the HOA badge gave her more authority than an actual police commissioner. Now, for the first few weeks after moving in, I kept a low profile, got to know a few neighbors, did some landscaping, walked Duke around the block twice a day, always leashed, always picking up after him, always friendly. But I noticed almost immediately that Karen would stand at her front window and watch us every time we passed, arms crossed, lips tight, like she was inspecting us for contraband. And then one morning, while Duke was lying calmly on the front lawn inside my clearly fenced yard, she marched right up the driveway in her loud flip-flops and sun hat that looked like it belonged in a 50s drama. And she pointed a finger at Duke like she was issuing an arrest warrant and said, "That animal needs to be on a leash and behind a fence, or I'm calling the authorities," which made me blink in surprise because Duke hadn't moved or barked or even acknowledged her presence. He was literally sunbathing and wagging his tail slowly, but I calmly responded that he was inside my property. The fence was code compliant, and there was no rule preventing him from enjoying the yard, especially since he was retired service and had full behavioral certifications on record. I even offered to show her his documentation, thinking maybe she was just a concerned grandma type who didn't know better. But instead of appreciating the info, she scoffed and said, "I don't care what kind of papers you have, dogs like that are dangerous, and I have grandkids visiting this weekend, and I won't have them traumatized by some attack dog next door," which irritated me. But I still tried to keep things calm, explaining that Duke was a decorated service dog, trained to be around kids, seniors, chaosu, name it, and was probably more qualified to handle emergencies than most adults. But her eyes narrowed and she stomped away without another word, and I figured that was the end of it until, not even 45 minutes later, I heard a knock at the door, looked through the peephole, and saw 2 animal control officers standing there with Karen peeking smugly from behind a parked car across the street like some kind of budget Bond villain. I opened the door, Duke right behind me as always, and the officers introduced themselves and said they received a report of an aggressive and possibly unlicensed dog loose in the neighborhood. My eyebrows shot up, and I invited them in politely, letting them know that the dog in question was not only licensed but had served in law enforcement longer than most rookies ever manage. And when Duke padded up to them, one of the officers, Officer Daniels, did a double take and said, "Wait a second, is this Duke from the 12th precinct?" And when I confirmed, he broke into a grin and knelt to pet Duke, telling the other officer how he'd heard stories about Duke's legendary takedowns, including the one where he tracked a kidnapping suspect through 3 miles of woods at night, leading to a child being rescued. It was clear from their reactions that not only were they not concerned about Duke's presence, they were in awe of him. But Karen, seeing her plan unravel, marched up to the door like she still had some kind of authority and demanded to know what was going to be done about the aggressive beast, claiming that Duke had lunged at her earlier, which was absolutely false and easily disproved because I have security cameras installed on my property. So I pointed one out and offered to replay the footage to the officers right then and there. They watched Karen gesturing wildly on the sidewalk and Duke lying completely still on the porch like a sleepy statue. And you could see the realization hit her as her lie unraveled in real time, especially when I provided Duke's service record, retirement papers, vaccination history, training certifications, and even a commendation letter from the chief of police. The officers looked at each other and told her in no uncertain terms that not only had no laws been broken, but that her call could potentially be classified as misuse of public services. Since there was no emergency and no aggressive behavior demonstrated by the dog, Karen looked like she was going to implode from the mix of rage, embarrassment, and the sudden lack of control. And I could almost hear her short-circuiting as she spun around and stormed off down the sidewalk, muttering about bylaws and taking this to the board. But I wasn't worried. Duke and I had faced worse in her in alleyways, meth labs, and active crime scenes, and one HOA busybody wasn't going to shake us. Though I did feel a little sad that this woman couldn't appreciate the fact that a literal hero was living next door. I thought that might be the end of it, but boy was I wrong. Over the next few days, Karen went on what I can only describe as a full-on petty campaign to try and make our lives difficult. She started filing complaint after complaint with the HOA board, citing obscure and irrelevant clauses like decorative items visible from the street because I had a small American flag on my porch, or non-standard landscaping because I had river stones in one flower bed instead of mulch. She even had the audacity to print out flyers warning neighbors about a dangerous expulsed dog with violent tendencies, distributing them into mailboxes and taping them to lampposts until one of the other neighbors, a retired Navy vet named Charlie, called her out publicly during a morning walk, tearing down the flyer and saying, "That dog's braver than you'll ever be," which got applause from a couple joggers and made Karen turn beet red before hurrying away. At this point, I'd had enough, so I wrote a formal letter to the HOA, complete with evidence debunking every single claim she'd made, attached Duke's full file again, included the animal control report showing 0 violations, and requested that any further complaints from her regarding Duke be subject to immediate dismissal unless she provided hard proof, which, of course, she didn't have on. I sent copies to every board member, some of whom actually responded with apologetic emails saying they had no idea she was blowing things this out of proportion. Things were quiet for about a week, and Duke and I got back into our routine, going for evening walks, saying hi to neighbors, soaking in the summer vibes. But then one morning I checked my mail and found a new envelope, hand-delivered, no postage, a letter from Karen addressed to the HOA board, but clearly copied for my awareness, in which she claimed that Duke's mere presence was causing her psychological distress, and she was formally requesting that he be removed from the community or otherwise contained within soundproof enclosures, as if I was keeping a lion in my living room instead of a sleepy shepherd who spent 90% of the day snoring on the couch. I laughed at first, thinking this had to be a joke, but when I realized she was actually serious, I decided enough was enough. It was time to stop reacting and start responding in a way she wouldn't forget. Because I wasn't just some homeowner she could bully into compliance, I was Duke's partner. And we'd been through hell and back together, and no paper tyrant and advisor was going to undo the peace we'd earned. So I started gathering documents, calling in favors, speaking with the police K9 unit, and even reaching out to my old precinct's PR officer, preparing for the next HOA board meeting where I intended to set the record straight and make it crystal clear to Karen and anyone else watching that not only were Duke and I not going anywhere, we were about to become the neighborhood's most respected residents, whether she liked it or not. And as I watched Duke snoozing peacefully by the window, one ear flicking lazily toward the birds outside, I smiled and thought, she has no idea who she's messing with. The moment I finished reading Karen's absurd demand that my partner, Duke, be removed from the community or kept in some sort of soundproof enclosure like he was a malfunctioning air conditioner, I realized we were way past petty complaints and into full-blown lunacy territory. And while the old Metha Pushpatirmand hammer-clothing, peace-seeking version would have ignored it and kept things civil, the version of me that had spent over a decade defusing bombs, tackling felons, and dragging people out of burning buildings knew exactly how to handle someone like Karen, with documentation, precision, and a little bit of tactical patience. So I dusted off my old detective instincts, called in a few favors from friends still in the force, and got to work preparing for the upcoming HOA general meeting, where I planned not only to shut Karen down for good but to make it clear that neither Duke nor I were to be messed